Hi, I just wanted to give you an update from one of my previous episodes. I believe it was a 3-part episode about Larry Eyler, and in his case, there were 2 unidentified victims. Let me give you a little bit of a quick history on what happened. On October 18th, 1983, there were some mushroom hunters who discovered 2 partially buried human skulls alongside an oak tree that was close to an abandoned farmhouse in Lake Village, Indiana. The authorities were contacted, and investigators discovered the partially decomposed bodies of 4 murder victims at this location. Each victim had been dead for several months. All had been partially buried with their face upwards, and sections of the body of each victim remaining exposed above ground, and they were just loosely covered with leaves and soil. So whoever had buried them didn't try hard to conceal them. All 4 victims had been bound and stabbed more than 24 times, and the trousers and underwear of each were discovered around their ankles. Furthermore, the body of one victim had been dismembered after death. All 4 murders were linked to the highway murderer, also known as Larry Eyler. The level of decomposition of each victim and the clothing discovered on each body suggested that several weeks or months had passed between each murder. And also, the farmhouse near the location where the bodies were found had evidence that this was the site that he used to restrain and torture these victims before just partially burying them beside the oak tree. By December of 1983, 2 of these 4 victims had been identified with dental records as Michael Bauer and John Bartlett. The 2 unidentified males were known as Brad Doe and Adam Doe. They described Brad Doe as a white male, most likely aged between 17 and 23 years old, with medium-length reddish or auburn wavy hair, and weighed approximately 130 to 180 pounds, and most likely between 5 feet 11 inches and 6 foot 1 inches in height. He had 2 known tattoos on the opposite sides of his right forearm. On April 24th, 2021, Brad Doe was identified as John Ingram Brandenburg Jr. of Chicago. He was 19 years old, and today would be about 59. He was called Johnny by his mother and had been drugged and killed by Eyler. He was identified using DNA and genetic genealogy after the Newton County, Indiana Coroner's Office and prosecutors reached out to the DNA Doe Project for help in 2019. The project uploads DNA samples from unidentified crime victims to GED Match, which is a public database of samples of genetic material, to try and put a name to unclaimed remains by identifying potential relatives. Investigators were finally able to match Brad Doe to a family member earlier this month. So that just leaves Adam Doe to be identified, and I am sure that his DNA has been sent to the same place, and hopefully we will get his identification soon. What I can tell you is that John Ingram Brandenburg Jr. died a horrific death, and I described it in my Larry Eyler Part 3 episode, but I will take a snippet of that episode and let you hear what happened to this young man that has now been identified. So that is all I have to say. If you want to listen to the Larry Eyler episodes, it goes into all of the murders in graphic detail, and I highly recommend listening to it. I will put the links to those episodes in the notes, and without further ado, here is the snippet of what happened to this poor young man. I, Larry Eyler, confessed to the murder of an unidentified Caucasian male in mid to late May of 1983. This person was killed in an old farmhouse close to Lake Village in Newton County, Indiana. I do not know the exact date of the killing, but I think Robert David Little, who was involved in this murder, was on a sabbatical from his job at Indiana State University. I had been fighting all week with my lover, John D. I decided to drive back to Terre Haute, Indiana, and stay with Little. Little hated John D. and was always trying to get me to leave him. Dave Little began talking to me about killing people about 6 months before the Stephen Crockett murder. Dave was present at 5 of the murder scenes. He alone killed Danny Bridges, and he and I together killed 4 additional people. He knew the details of all of the murders. I brought him the victims' t-shirts. In exchange, he gave me money and gifts and took me on trips. He was very nice to me, almost like a father. And I bear him no ill will. I killed 17 people alone, so I am worse than he is, but in order to tell the truth about these crimes, I have to describe Dave Little's part in them. I remember being in Greencastle on the day of this murder. When I returned to Little's townhouse on Keene Lane, this 20 to 25-year-old Caucasian male was at the townhouse with Dave Little. I think this person was about my height, thin and not good looking. Little always had to pay for sex, and usually, or many times, the men he had sex with were not good looking. Little said he had picked this guy up earlier, but he didn't say where. Little took this guy to the bedroom for a while. Little came out and told me he had talked this guy into doing a wild scene at the farmhouse outside of Lake Village in Newton County. Little knew about the murders of Bartlett and Bauer because I brought their shirts to him. Little said he was bringing his Polaroid with a flash and his Nikon. He told me to get the murder bag out of the garage. We took my truck. I offered this guy beer, which he drank. I took Quaaludes. Quaaludes are a central nervous system depressant, and it was a popular recreational drug in the U.S. from the 1960s until the 1980s. I offered him Placidil, but Dave shook his head no. He wanted this guy awake when we killed him. This person seemed sort of dumb to me. I couldn't tell if he had been at Little's townhouse before. They seemed sort of familiar, but no mention was made of any prior meetings at Little's townhouse. Dave showed him a $100 bill that he kept in a bag in the front seat. Dave told him, "We are looking for something really far out." He said, "We want to tie you to this post or tree at the farmhouse, and one of us will suck you off while the other takes pictures." This person said he didn't know if he wanted to, but Little said, "We'll give you $100. This person said, "Okay, I need the money." We drove up 63 North to 41 North until we got to the old farmhouse. I parked the truck so that it couldn't be seen from the road. We picked a spot where these 2x4s looked like a cross. Dave said this would be a good place to tie him up. I got the rope out of the bag. Dave set up the flashlights to shine on this person. I worked real fast. I tied his feet with the rope. I wrapped duct tape around his head 3 to 4 times. I handcuffed his hands behind him. Dave had already started masturbating. He would always say, "Get his eyes, get his eyes." I put an ace bandage around his eyes. He stayed still at first. Dave said, "Okay, stand next to him and put the knife against his stomach after you pull his shirt up." I did this, and he began to squirm. Dave snapped a picture and said, "Pull his pants down." I had to struggle with this person because he seemed to know something was wrong. I pulled his pants down to his knees. Dave took a picture of this. Dave said, "Okay, kill the motherfucker." This person really began to struggle, which really excited Dave. I said to this person, "Okay, make your peace with God, motherfucker." I thought about John D., and I felt an enormous rage building up inside of me. I started stabbing and stabbing. Blood was everywhere. By this time, Dave had came all over the ground. He rushed forward and grabbed the knife in my hand. He started stabbing this person until his body slumped forward. Dave said, "Take him down." I untied his feet, took the duct tape out of his mouth, the ace bandage off his eyes, the rope and handcuffs off of him. Dave said, "Lay him out on the ground." Dave had started masturbating again. I felt exhausted, but I knew Dave wanted more, so I kept stabbing this person. I think I hit him in the face, too. I felt exhausted. Dave said we have to cut off his head and hands to prevent identification. He said, "I don't want him to be connected to me." I can't remember too much about this part, but I cut the head and hands off this person. I used my knife and a hacksaw. We put the parts in a garbage bag and dumped it in a dumpster outside Terre Haute. We went back to the townhouse in Terre Haute. We washed our clothes. We never talked about the murders afterwards. Little would always send the pictures off to be developed to the same place. He used to say they didn't care what they developed. Little would keep the pictures in a checkbook box in his closet. He would use these pictures and the victim's clothes to masturbate. After this murder, Dave gave me money. He was always very good to me, like a father.
He always gave me a home. I am not angry with him, but I had to include him in this confession to make it truthful. I gave this statement voluntarily to my attorney to disclose upon my death.